We're going to have a look at floats and integers a little bit more in detail. So if, for example, I go 3 divided by 2, it's going to come up as a float because that's what it is. Automatically, it's 1.5. We can, for example, say that we would like the answer as an integer, and we're just going to type in int, short for integer, 3 divided by 2, and now if I press enter, it's just going to come up with an integer answer of 1. Of course, even if we took any float number and we wanted to convert it to an integer, it's just basically int, and there it is. Of course, we could do this the other way around as well. So we could type in float, and we can say any number, which is the number 3, and if I then press enter, it will come up and convert that integer number of 3 to a float of 3.0, which in essence is the same thing anyway. One of the reasons why you might want to use an integer as opposed to a float is because of rounding off errors. Something else I'd like to discuss is rounding off remainders. So if, for example, I say 4 divided by 4, it's going to come up with an answer of 0 because I have 0 remainders, because 4 goes into 4 exactly the right amount of times. But let's say, for example, I have, so let's take 5 divided by 4, and this will give us a remainder or an answer of 1, which means that 4 goes into 4 once and there's 1 remainder. We can also, for example, let's go 12 divided by 5. Now this will give us an answer of 2 remainders. Now this becomes very useful, especially when we do things like loops and a couple of things that we'll do a little bit later on as well. Let's now have a little look at strings at a little bit more in depth. So let's start off, and I'm going to say x is equal to cheese. So if I now type in x, it's going to come out and say cheese. I can, however, add multiple variables altogether. So for example, if I now write y is equal to sandwich, and I can now write, well, what is x plus y, it's going to come up and say it's a cheese sandwich. You will notice that there's actually no spaces within this. So what I would have to do is I'd actually have to physically put in the space. And now if I did exactly the same thing, it should now come up and say cheese spelled badly, sandwich spelled badly. So we can define and add different variables and add them all together. Let's now add a couple of other things. So for example, I'm going to say z is equal to the number 10, and if I now type in, for example, x plus y plus z, it's going to come back and it's going to tell me that there's a problem. And the problem is you can't have a string and an integer together at the same time. So what we're going to have to do is we'll have to try and find a way around that. So over here it says exactly that. It can't convert an integer object to a string. So what we need to do is we can say x plus y plus, and to tell the computer that the number that is there, the integer, is actually a string, we're just going to type in str, and we're going to say that z is now a string. So now it's going to come up with cheese sandwich and the number 10. Let's have a little look at integers and floats in a little bit more detail. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say z is equal to 10, and if I type in z, it's going to have an output of 10. What we can now also do is I'm going to say y is equal to my number is, and I'm going to type in a percentage d, and d for now, well, d represents an integer, and an f would represent a float. I'm not quite sure why d is an integer, but that's the way it is. And I'm now going to type in percentage of z. So if, for example, I now type in y, it should now come up and say my number is 10. So remember, z was equal to 10, and what we've said is my number is make whatever is z into an integer. Now we can also do this in a different way, and we can now do exactly the same thing, and we're going to say y is equal to my number is percentage f, which stands for float, and percentage z. So if I now press y, it now comes up and says my number is 10.000. Now there's quite a couple of different zeros after the decimal point. So what we can do is we can use a little trick. The little secret is we're going to type in .3f, and we're then going to go percentage z. So the .3 means that we're going to have 3 decimal points. So if I type in y, there it is, 10.000. Of course, that digit 3, we could make any digit that we wanted. So if we only wanted it to have 1 decimal point, that would simply become a 1 instead. One of the quite useful things with this is we could have a really long number after the decimal point. So for example, let's say z is equal to 10 dot all of that, and we can now do exactly the same thing. We can type in y is equal to my number is percentage, and I'm going to round this off to 2 decimal points, and percentage z. So now if I type in y, I have an output which has been rounded off to 10.65.